Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to the very first episode of the podcast. For the inaugural show, I couldn't think of a better guest than my old friend, Dr. Christian Rizea. He's a clinical psychologist, hypnotherapist, and relationship coach. We talk about all of those things along with some of the work he's done dealing with people facing some of the most difficult mental health challenges. I really enjoyed catching up with him, and I think that you will too. So please, join us. All right, I'm here with Dr. Christian Rizea. Chris, thanks for joining us today.
All right, thanks, Phil.
So where I want to start is in 1999. You're 17 years old and you decided to volunteer at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto. Now, when I was 17, that was not something I could even fathom. So I want to ask you, why?
Well, I've always been interested in helping others and especially people with mental illnesses because I had a lot of friends growing up. I had a good friend of mine. He had very severe OCD. He couldn't even sit in class without having to run to the bathroom and wash his hands over 100 times a day. And I always thought to myself, what the hell is going on with my friend here? I just thought this guy had a problem with cleanliness. And I just did my own research at a young age and found out, wow, this guy has, something called obsessive compulsive disorder. It's a mental health problem. And I wanted to do something in terms of learning more about how humans work and help at the same time. So at the age of 17, I went to Canada's largest psychiatric inpatient hospital and asked if I can volunteer. And, I had to get my parents' permission at the time because they never had someone that young volunteer. And I would go every week onto an inpatient psychiatric unit, play bingo, do recreation activities and things like that with a lot of the inpatients.
Okay. What were your expectations going in and how were they realized or not? What surprised you?
Well, I kind of thought it was going to be something like One Who Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. You're going to have this cast of characters and they're going to be rebelling against the system. And, I was going to help them along the way, but it wasn't like that. I was able to just develop relationships with people and help them feel more human. And even though it was just bingo, board games, card games, I really got a sense of, what people were going through, what they were struggling with, and just being able to establish human relationships with them, not make them feel like outcasts, was actually therapeutic. I learned that later on because I felt like, well, what I'm doing is not helpful. I want to do bigger things, but, at that stage of my life, just being so young, it was actually doing a lot more than I thought it would be. So that was kind of, some of my expectations. And, there was that fantasy of kind of trying to help and save people at the same time. But no, there was still a lot of good things done. And, I remember this one time a man came to me with a suicide letter. I'm just like a 17, 18-year-old kid at the time. I'm like, oh man, what do I do with this? I read it and it was just like, okay, Dad, I look forward to seeing you soon. I said, hey, where's your dad? And he says to me, oh, he's in heaven. And I just it strikes me like, oh man, I'm going to see you soon. That doesn't sound good. So I was able to bring it to a psychiatrist and talk with the psychiatrist about it. And it was definitely a red flag that this guy was, kind of thinking of taking his life soon. So, at an early age, I was exposed to a lot of the realities of people with severe mental illness, what they're struggling with, and kind of finding signs that they're asking for help. They want to get better, but they may not know how to communicate that properly, depending on what's going on in their life at the time.
Okay. I want to touch on something you said at the start. So you mentioned your friend who you realized had some mental health challenges, and that motivated you. But you also said you've always wanted to help people. So
Right.
When did you really understand that? Do you have a first recollection of that?
Yeah, I do. So, kind of going back in terms of trying to understand people, I was always drawn to like esoteric wisdom, whether it was just like palm reading, astrology, reading books about psychics, things like that. I was just like, oh, okay, this is really interesting. I get to learn about people and also help people. I remember I'd learn how to like read palms, go to parties, I don't know, try to pick up girls by reading their palms. Okay, it didn't always work, but it always gained, some interest and piqued curiosity. But I guess in terms of actually helping people, I would say in high school, I was learning about spirituality, and I came across learning more about religion, and in particular Christianity. And I read the New Testament, and I was like, oh wow, there's this hippie dude, named Jesus would go around helping people, and I thought like, oh, okay, that's something actually admirable that I would like to, kind of live my life.
So you were motivated by Christ.
Well, yeah, it was more of a spiritual motivation at the time. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Um, so
Not necessarily just Christianity, but I think that was kind of something that really put it into something that wasn't so. I guess you can say, I don't know, it was more relatable. I would read a lot of things about like, for example, I remember there was this like psychic. Her name was like Sylvia Brown. I don't know if you remember her.
yes,
She was, yeah, she was like, kind of called out as being a fraud and all this stuff, right? But actually, I read one of her books and I thought it was really cool and helpful, right? But I was like, dude, this is so weird. Like, how is this even applicable to like everyday life, right? She's like talking
Mhm.
about like alternate realities and parallel universes, and I'm like, okay, this is interesting, but how do I help people with this kind of knowledge? And so I was like kind of going down a little more of a spiritual journey. Read the New Testament. Well, I'm like, because I thought, well, I gotta read this at least at some point in my life, right? And I was like, oh, okay, I see how it is. I kind of like the idea of compassion and empathy, and yeah, compassion was kind of like a huge driver and motivating force for me in my life at that point in terms of wanting to help people.
Okay, so you get you're through adolescence, I suppose, and decide to make this your career. You go to school for it, and you go to California to become a psychologist, and you started working with people with trauma and PTSD. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So I remember, when I first started seeing clients, it was at a high school. And so it was so, it struck me as like, what the hell is going on here? Because, there's really a big difference between high schools in the United States and Canada, where I grew up in Toronto, Canada, because literally when at that high school, there were like 3 kids who got killed. I mean, Phil, you and I, we went to the same high school. Did we have like 3 kids that died throughout the whole course of our time in high school from like gun violence?
No one ever from gun violence. No, I don't recall
E-
anyone ever.
Exactly. So I was just like, wow, what the hell is going on? Right. Because there was, it was in San Leandro, California, which is like right at the border of Oakland. And there's like a lot of gang violence between, those 2 towns. And I remember as soon as I started, like one kid, he got murdered, and it was gang related violence, and it really impacted the whole school. And so teachers and principals were like, okay, we've got a clinician. We can just start sending our 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 students who are traumatized by these issues, to get helped by this clinician. And it was more than just, okay, the kids were impacted by he was like a football player, him dying, but they had a lot of other things going on in their lives, and it was all about the traumas they were experiencing. And I was just like, oh my god, everything is kind of connecting back to a lot of early childhood traumas that these kids were going through, and it was kind of playing out again, in later adolescence by getting involved in gangs and getting in trouble with the law. So yeah, that was kind of like my early experience there.
Okay, so I mean, you're still a very young man at this point, and even in '99 when you're at CAMH, you're a teenager. How are you coping with this stuff? Because this is heavy stuff. These are the people with some of the deepest,
Mhm.
darkest problems. How are you able to process this?
Well, I was kind of naive, which in a way was like a little bit of a protective factor when you kind of just like don't really see everything that's going on, right?
Hmm.
Um, but in terms of coping, yeah, I realized that I have definitely a good social support network of friends. I was really involved into other things in my life that so like just like mental health treatment and working with guys who had severe mental health illnesses. It wasn't my like entire life at the time. So you're able to leave it at at the workplace and all that. But you know, I had a lot of other things going in my life, so I wasn't totally consumed in by those kinds of like heavy topics. And there was a part of me that was just like that knew it was part of my purpose in life. And so when something is really your calling, your purpose, your why, like you're able to persevere through difficult times, right? You're able to move forward and be like, hey, this is all part of the journey because this is kind of like why I'm here as well, you know. So I think that was kind of a huge part of my coping. It's really how I made meaning of all the weird stories, weird and strange encounters. Like I remember I go into I was at CAMH there. It was on one of the psychiatric units. I go into the bathroom, right, on one of the units, and this woman comes in the bathroom and she hands me a letter saying, I want you to kiss me. I'm like, what the hell? Like, first of all, she shouldn't be here in the bathroom. She was kind of like watching me, following me into the bathroom. And then she wants me to like start kissing her in the bathroom. It's like, hell no, right? So I leave, give her back the letter. I say, nope, not going to happen. I leave. And, that could be pretty scary and upsetting for a lot of people, but it's just like, oh, okay, you're kind of more curious about like what's going on through people's minds. Like, okay, how can like we help people process, what they experience, like, what drove them to do those kinds of behaviors in the first place. So, just kind of taking a look at the larger picture and, kind of like how you play a part in their experience as well. And, kind of help people go through that.
Okay. So that was a limited amount of time while you were studying, right? And then you become licensed, uh, t- uh, and you start working at the interestingly named California Healthcare Facility. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that and the work you were doing there? What exactly is the California Healthcare Facility, first of all?
Okay, well, the California Healthcare Facility is run by the California Departments of Corrections and Rehabilitation. It's basically a prison with an inpatient psychiatric wing to the prison, and it's actually considered the largest inpatient psychiatric hospital in the world. So basically, all the state prisons in California send us their mental health inmates. So these are people who they can't function on a mainline prison because their mental illness is so severe, or they've recently had a suicide attempt, or are suicidal or homicidal.
Okay, so that's pretty different from the students that you were dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me about that. Tell me about interacting with inmates, criminals, violent offenders, and like, were you scared ever?
Well, yeah, actually, I think there's still a lot of connection in terms of you mentioned the students and what could lead people down the path of criminality, and I think a lot of it comes back to the traumas that people experience in early life, and not resolving those issues could actually lead people down a life of um, criminality. And, obviously it's not for everyone. That doesn't happen to everyone, but, depending on a lot of certain circumstances, like, for example, we deal with a lot of people who are gang members. And, if you look at the past history, a lot of people with who join gangs, well, they've experienced a lot of violent trauma in their life, a lot of abandonment issues in early stages of their life, and, kind of seeking out gangs to have a sense of identity, to feel more in control, more powerful, a sense of community, maybe something, perhaps even father figure, something that they were missing out in their own lives, kind of joining gangs, and then, kind of getting wrapped up in all the issues that gangs do, violence, drugs, whatever that may be. And, they may have underlying psychiatric issues that were unresolved, mainly due to trauma growing up in their communities. And, it's a slippery slope. It's a snowball effect where, they go to prison, they have their own psychiatric issues, and after they wind up in the inpatient wing, seeing people like me for treatment.
Mm-hmm. And do you find you're able to help these people, or like what are
Mm-hmm.
these sort of cases like?
Yeah, well, I would say, we are able to help people. I wish we could have better resources. I wish, like, headquarters, these are the people in Sacramento who are kind of like running the show. I wish they would actually communicate with us better and actually asking us how we feel we need to run these programs versus, these kind of like people, they're not really on the floor. They're just kind of coming in once in a while, dictating, how we do treatment, things like that. So, but with the resources we have, yeah, we are able to help a lot of people. So in terms of, like, what are a lot of the people coming in with? So let's say a person is feeling suicidal because they have, like, a long prison sentence, right? And, a lot of people, they basically give up meaning to life. Like, what's the purpose of, living a life in prison when, it's such a long sentence, right? So a lot of people give up hope, and they need to kind of start having a new meaning and purpose in life. Like, what still how can they still live a life worth living, even though it's not how they envisioned things were going to turn out for them.
Okay. Now, with your time there and between CAMH and then at that high school, is there any sort of parallels that you can draw about maybe how we approach people with mental health problems, regardless of whether they're criminals or
Hmm.
high school students or.
Yeah, I think we're really used to just dividing how we view mental health problems and just treating symptoms rather than the causes of the main mental health issues. So, again, like I said, we may have people coming in with depression, whether it was a high school setting or in a community mental health setting, and or also, yeah, but they, like, what are the main causes of the depression? A lot of people may want to throw medications at it right away, or they want to just help people develop coping skills to cope with depression. But a coping skill, yes, it's important to learn them. It's important to know how to deal with strong emotions when they come up, but it's also not helping resolve the main cause of an issue. So I think that's kind of like uh, something that's underlying across all these different areas that we talk about, and it's learning how to identify the main causes, the origins of a lot of mental health issues, and learning how to resolve them properly.
Uh, I think that actually is very true of not only just mental health issues, but also another topic that you have been doing work in, and that's personal relationships. So
Yeah.
around the same time that you started working at California Healthcare Facility, you started this work as a relationship coach. So tell me about what motivated that.
Sure. So when I was in graduate school, I moved to California, San Francisco, the city of love. And, I was thinking to myself, wow, this is going to be great. As a single young guy, okay, I'm going to maybe meet like women, have fun, party, all that kind of stuff. But the truth was, I did not have a relationship for many years when I moved out to San Francisco, 2006. For many years, I was very actually socially anxious to even approach and talk women. And if women liked me, I would self-sabotage in terms of, not pursuing a relationship with like very, very nice women. And I was just like, what the hell is going on with me? And I had to do a lot of my own personal work in terms of resolving a lot of my issues around dating and relationships, and just kind of this social anxiety a lot that I was feeling, that was really a barrier to getting into intimate relationships, which I really wanted.
Okay. And so how were you able to, get over that and get into a meaningful relationship?
Yeah, well, a few things were, just like how any other guy, has questions, they go to the internet for answers. And, I basically wanted to like learn how to, date women, start relationships, just maybe approach a woman that I found attractive or interesting at a party, and just strike up a conversation. And so I went to the internet and, typed in, how to meet women kind of thing. And, there was obviously a community of guys out there who give techniques, strategies, tips on terms of like social dynamics. And I would learn, a lot of people call these guys pickup artists, right? But there was actually there's a lot more to it rather than just techniques you learn in the long run. You start asking yourself questions about like, you know, uh, dynamics between men and women. Like how are you interpersonally, not just men and women, how are you interpersonally with other guys as well? So I started exploring more about my own interpersonal dynamics, how I come across off to other people. How do other people experience me when I'm just socializing with them, when I'm talking with them? And yeah, I learned a lot about myself, that I felt I was not living to my true self, right? It was definitely, my true self was not, I wasn't being authentic. My true self was not being conveyed in my day-to-day actions. What was really being portrayed was a version of myself that wanted acceptance, approval, and to be liked. And that kind of behavior, well, it's actually not what first of all, you're not being true to yourself. You're not having your own needs met. You're not being assertive. But in the long run, it's not what builds that kind. It builds like platonic relationships versus one of how men and women interact and build attraction with each other.
Okay, so then when was the point, or how did you start to be more authentic and more of your true self?
Okay, I think one part was getting in touch with my masculine energy. And because there was really, when you're going through graduate schools, learning psychology, you're really getting in touch with your feminine side, learning how to be empathic, not to say that men aren't, but just really delving more into a lot of your feminine energy, being caretaker, good at, let's say, I don't know, being a nurturer, helper, and of course, this guys have these qualities as well. We see it every day, but I really felt like, I needed to develop and get in touch more with my masculine energy. So I would engage in more things like Muay Thai kickboxing, just kind of getting in touch with more of my physicality, which is part of my masculine energy. I would be more assertive in my communication. I would create more in the world rather than consume. And, when I started getting in touch with more of my masculine energy, I started noticing, okay, women would relate to me a lot more different.
Different how?
Well, one thing was, okay, for example, part of getting in touch with my masculine energy would be knowing what I want and going after it without, I would say, knowing what I want and going after it, and being like a man with a plan in my life. For example, if I were to set up a date, I would have a very structured plan. I would say like, hey, this is where we're going. This would be the time. And of course, I'd throw it back to the person like, yeah, and does that work for you, right? Most of the time, yeah, kind of like a woman wants you to be, to have a man with a plan when you're setting up a date, right? Not like, okay, what do you want to do kind of thing, right? So when you're kind of taking control more of that situation, you're really conveying a lot of that masculine energy that you know what you want. You are in control of the situation. There aren't any, you're not putting all the burden on her to come up with the plans or anything like that. And so, yeah, I would notice that my dates would go a lot better.
Okay, and then you start having success, and then when do you start helping others with these same challenges?
Well, I would say, when I started being in a more serious relationship, and I started getting the hang of, okay, male female dynamics, I would post about on like Instagram about narcissism and codependent relationships. I'd write like little blogs about this kind of interpersonal dynamic. And then I would get a lot of messages from women saying, hey, I'm in a relationship with a narcissist. Can you help me out? So from there, I would, have coaching calls with women and discover like, wait a second, yeah, you may be in a relationship with someone who's a narcissist, but you also have a lot of your own past traumas that are attracting these kinds of guys into your life because some of your past traumas are not resolved. And, I don't want to put labels on things, but, sometimes a lot of these women would have like a lot of codependent personality traits themselves. So that's when I started helping a lot of women in these really toxic relationships in terms of how to get out of them, how to find true love in their life, and to have their own needs met first.
Okay, so you threw out some terms there, and I'd like to break them down a little bit. So, so the two you mentioned were the narcissist and the codependent. So, first, what's a narcissist?
So a narcissist is someone who's overly focused on their needs and diminishes the needs of other people. And so usually, we have this can be all on a spectrum of very severe. If someone has like a narcissistic personality disorder, this is if they have an exaggerated sense of self-importance, entitlement. They put other people down to get what they want. They're preoccupied with fantasies of success, power, and they believe they're kind of somewhat special in some way, right? They kind of have this grandiose view of themselves, right? But this is their basically a main coping to really feelings of insecurity and feeling defective. So this is those are some of the main character traits of someone who's a narcissist.
So somebody who deep down has this insecurity uses this like intense selfishness. Is that accurate or?
Yeah, there's definitely that selfishness involved. It's definitely one that is self-serving. So a lot of their behaviors are self-serving. So we sometimes talk about people who are like true narcissists, kind of have a parasitic lifestyle. Meaning, if you think of like what a parasite does, it searches for a host and tries to suck and take whatever it can from it, emotionally, materialistically, and so yeah, that would be the selfishness, the self-serving.
So then what is codependent personality, and what is that dynamic in a relationship with somebody who has a narcissistic personality?
So someone who has a codependent personality traits is they are, I guess I would say that they're self-sacrificers. They take responsibility for everyone's actions, and they are constantly worrying and carrying the burdens of other people's problems. So they cover up and protect people a lot of the time. So, for example, you may have this, you typically have this classic view of, let's say, a narcissist who has an alcohol problem, right? And may have a codependent wife who will call in for the alcohol, call in the boss for the alcoholic and say, oh, my husband, he's sick. He can't make it into work, right? So she's enabling his drinking behaviors, right? So she's constantly protecting him. And at the same time, she maybe feels like responsibility to fix him in some way as well,
Mm-hmm.
right? So she's becoming like a self-sacrificer. I think that's like kind of a true codependence. These people who are like huge self-sacrificers to the point where they have like this martyr syndrome going on.
Mm-hmm. Now, is this predominantly the problems that you're seeing in the relationships that are coming to you? Or there's some others that we haven't mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I do see a lot of that. Even, I kind of talk about, I say male, female, kind of stereotypically, but, also a lot of guys exhibit a lot of codependent kinds of behaviors. I know that from myself, I did as well. I wouldn't say it was like pathological to the point where, I was enabling a lot of negative behaviors in my partner. But yeah, I also see a lot of guys who exhibit a lot of codependent, needy, kind of clingy behaviors. So I think, yeah, these are a lot of the dynamics I'm seeing a lot these days.
Is that the same as the nice guy syndrome? Is that what you're referring?
Oh yeah, and that's the nice guy syndrome. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. So kind of like
Yeah.
the nice guy syndrome is, kind of is what I was talking about earlier, which I had, right? I was I was very people pleasing and thinking that that's how I would get approval, and that's how I thought that was kind of like my main way of like building attraction and relationships with people. Obviously, that doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. And through your own path, you mentioned that you got in touch with sort of more masculine activities, more physical activities, and that helped you sort of get a grasp of yourself. Is that what you recommend to guys right now who are sort of trapped in that nice guy syndrome? Is there something else that you recommend for them?
Yeah, I think the first thing for guys who are, experiencing the nice guy syndrome, would to look at, their first of all, look at their own dynamics in terms of what their relationships were with their parents. Okay, usually you have a lot of nice guys had overbearing fathers and mothers who were, I guess, too accommodating for them. Okay, so you may have like overbearing, maybe really mean fathers, and I guess mothers who are afraid or didn't like that kind of scary masculine energy. It was like too intense. It was too perhaps even violent, and so they would condition their child to be the opposite of that, right? So kind of looking at some of those early dynamics in terms of like how maybe how you were raised in terms of relationship with your mother, and what your relationship with your father was. Some kids, some guys would grow up not liking not liking their father, and kind of vow to themselves like, I'm going to be the complete opposite of what my father was, because he was a jerk. I didn't like anything about him, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so it's kind of like they do the complete opposite of what their own father did. And that's when you get a lot of those nice guy personality traits. So first of all, I would start off by recognizing what were those family dynamics within yourself, right? So that it's important to have the insight, but what do you do with the insight after that, right? First thing, after you start gaining insight into your own personal dynamics, like how those behaviors in yourself were developed, I would start learning to create boundaries with people in your life, learning how to say no and being okay with not being liked and the consequences of saying no. You may actually be pleasantly surprised to notice when you start saying no to people and having your own needs met first, that, yeah, people may not like you at first, but that's okay. You will survive, and you will actually be able to focus more on yourself, what you need, rather than putting other people first.
I totally agree. I think a lot of people can have some like personal
Yeah.
anecdotes that demonstrate that. Okay, so another interesting topic is sort of part of your work is that you practice hypnotherapy. So maybe you can talk about what is hypnotherapy.
Okay, great. So hypnotherapy, basically hypnosis is a way of bypassing the conscious mind, the analytical and critical mind. We have the conscious mind, we have the subconscious mind, and we have also what is like the collective unconscious, right? And but what we work with in hypnotherapy is the subconscious mind, because basically a lot of our behaviors become conditioned into our mind and body and become subconscious, right? Whether they're our habits, the way we relate to people, our feelings. And, we can do a lot of forms of therapy, like cognitive therapy, which works a lot with our conscious mind, which is really important, being very analytical about things. However, after a while, if you don't change the subconscious mind, those are the I guess you can call them programs and mechanisms that are driving the conscious mind, you're not going to have permanent change in the long run. So anytime you have permanent, lasting change in a person, in your personality and in your behaviors, the subconscious mind has to be affected. Okay, so this is where things like hypnotherapy, meditation come in.
Okay, and so what's an example of sort of like something that you would do in a hypnotherapy session? Yeah.
Okay. So let's say a person has a smoking problem. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of someone who has a issue with smoking, right? And I know I used to be a smoker. I was a smoker for 15 years, like heavy smoker. You remember that, Phil, right?
Oh, definitely. I don't remember you quitting, actually.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, no. I stopped for a long time. I trust me. I hate cigarettes. I'm like disgusted in them. Right. And I would really have a lot to attribute to it. Like I had one hypnotherapy session, right, and I
Mhm.
kind of looked at, part of my own hypnotherapy to stop smoking was I looked at some of the things that why I started smoking. So I remember when I first started smoking, my brother gave me my first drags of a cigarette, and I don't know, I was probably in the 5th grade at the time, and then he went off to. My parents sent him off to Romania to go to high school because whatever, he was a bit of a troublemaker. They thought, they can straighten him out, sending him there. But I kind of saw one thing. And even after he left, I was offered to smoke again. And it was almost like kind of like reestablishing this this connection again with my brother, if that makes sense. It was kind of like,
Absolutely.
yeah, like smoking was kind of like reestablishing that subconscious connection with my brother. He was off in another country, right? And this was all very subconscious. And I know there's a lot of people. I forgot there was this TED Talks. It kind of even looks at like addictions and how people become addicted because it also forms this sense of connectivity to people as well, right? But that was kind of what was going on for me. Like there was this subconscious connection, and then over the years, I put on these other layers of when I was forming my own identity in high school. Part of my own identity in high school was, okay, I'm this like rocker because I played in a rock band. Okay, I'm a guitarist. Part of that identity was, yeah, you're a guitarist. You're playing a rock band. Part of that identity was you smoke. Right, the guys who I looked up to was Slash. I remember I even met Slash from Guns N' Roses, and we even smoked a cigarette together. Kurt Cobain, we always saw a picture with him with a cigarette hanging from his mouth. So that was kind of part of like my identity too. So part of the hypnotherapy involved looking at what were the subconscious motivations, the connection with my brother. That was something I was very unaware of. And also, what were the reinforcers? The reinforcers were maintaining an identity, a certain identity that I wanted to have in myself, right? So I had to really, so I remember changing changing my relationship, that identity. Yes, I could still be a musician, but it doesn't mean I have to be a smoker. Yes, I could still have a relationship with my brother, but it doesn't mean I have to continue smoking. So it's changing those subconscious beliefs and creating a new meaning, a new relationship to those beliefs.
And you mentioned in that something, and you mentioned it briefly a second ago as well. You talk about the self and this personal identity, and
Mm-hmm.
as you were talking about the hypnotherapy, you also mentioned meditation, and this is a topic near and dear to my heart. And so it's sort of it's difficult to summarize,
Yeah.
but maybe you can talk about those ideas, the self and personal identity and meditation, and how that's helpful in your practice
Mm-hmm.
and helpful, I think, for everybody.
Sure. So this idea of the self, I like thinking about, we all have within us a true self. And this true self is not touched by the traumas that we've experienced in our lives. It's very pure, and it has the qualities. When you think of what a good person is, it exhibits those qualities. It's calm, it's understanding, it's compassionate, And, this is kind of just like maybe part of like a spiritual belief that I have that, we're all, most of us, I don't know about most of it, but yeah, we're all born with a true self that is untouched by the traumas in our life, right? And when we can get in touch with that true self, that higher and wiser part of ourselves in meditative states, in a hypnotic state as well, because we are resetting our nervous system to be back in a state where it is calm, where it is centered, where it is present-minded.
Present-minded. I guess that idea that we're observing ourselves, not merely being ourselves.
Yep, that's true. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any advice for anyone going through some of these issues? Maybe not at the serious clinical level that you've seen, but maybe more common relationship issues that you see people dealing with?
Sure. I think, let's say, some of the common relationship issues I see nowadays is how people are using social media and technology in terms of dating relationships. And, so for example, I think a lot of people meet online these days, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, that's, how I think the majority of people are getting into relationships. You can get really lost in that, right? I know women who start a, let's say, Match.com account, whatever that may be, and are bombarded with guys just messaging them constantly. And I know a lot of people, they can always get in, and guys too themselves, they can get caught up into the, what else is out there kind of cycle. So I think that's kind of a trap of modern day society, using technology and dating relationships, kind of finding someone you want to have a deep, meaningful relationship with. And, that could actually pass if you're constantly saying, what else is out there? Who else is better? Well, I've got like 5 other dates set up next week, I didn't really feel that connection immediately with, maybe someone they had a single date with or something like that. So I feel like, getting clear on what your values are and kind of screening people out before you start setting up all these dates is really important. But yeah, being crystal clear about what your values are in life. And if people aren't meeting, don't have similar values to yourself, there's going to be a lot of turmoil in the future if that's what if you're looking for a deep and meaningful relationship.
I've definitely heard that a lot, about, online dating. Like you set up the date and it's like the whole nature of it, this swipe right, swipe left, mechanic that these apps have, they foster this idea that there's always a next one, another better one. And so rather than appreciating, who you're with, you're sort of you're finding flaws and looking for what else is going to be out there.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess it comes into the paradox of choice. When there's too much choice, you become paralyzed in making decisions, right? Now, you want to come to a point where you do have choices, right? But literally, our human brain did not evolve to choose interpersonal relationships out of thousands of people. We evolved in small tribes and in small societies, and you basically could process like 50 relationships at once in terms of like deciding who are your companions, who are your friends, who are your allies, who are your enemies, who you're going to mate with. That's about it. But I literally know people because, I've been doing the whole dating relationship coaching for a while now and talking to other dating relationship coaches. I know this one person, she went on, oh yeah, easily over 100 dates in a year. Yeah. Yeah. And I know another person, it was just, it's just way too much. The human brain did not evolve to have, to process all these kinds of relationships at once. It's too overwhelming. And it's like, really, you couldn't find that one person over 100 dates in a year. I mean, this may sound judgmental, but there's something else that's going on that this person is chasing after.
No, I definitely agree. Yeah, option paralysis is definitely a thing for a lot of things in life. It's like I always say, you always want to go to the restaurant with the small menu, right? So
Yeah, there you go.
yeah. All right. Well, that's been fantastic. So what are you working on next? Because I do know you mentioned that you've got a project coming up.
Yeah, so right now I'm creating an online coaching program for dating and relationships in terms of finding, your soulmate, however you want to see it, your true love in life, and it's going to combine modern psychology, energy psychology, spirituality, and it's going to be an online community where we meet. It'll be a month long. We'll meet twice a week. We do online coaching with a group of other like-minded individuals, and we work through a lot of barriers to finding and attracting the love that we want in our lives.
I think that's great. I think having a community is a big important part, right? Like if people dating, they're kind of isolated, right? They're out in the dating world all alone.
Mm-hmm.
So having others that they can share with and get feedback on, I think that's great.
Yeah. So if you're interested in things like psychology, the law of attraction, those kinds of things, energy healing, energy psychology, well, yeah, you should check out the online programs I'm going to be starting very soon.
Okay, so in order, in anticipation of that, how can people get in touch with you if they'd like to reach you?
The best way to do that is to go to my Instagram and follow me at Dr. Chris 10. So that's at DrChris10. So that would be the best place to DM me if you have any questions about dating, relationships, or anything in general. If you need help with achieving current goals for the year. And yeah, but just follow me there. I'll update people at Dr. Chris 10 on Instagram.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Chris. It was awesome to talk to you. And hopefully we'll talk to you again soon once the community's going and we can dive deeper into that.
Sounds good, Phil. Thanks for the conversation. It's been fun.
Thank you to Dr. Christian Rizea for joining me, and thanks again to everyone for tuning in. We'll be back soon with another guest. Until next time.